Hey everybody, welcome to part 2, Slavery in the Bible series. Today what I want to do is talk about a few definitions. I want to define basically what the two major types of slavery that exist that we're going to talk about. And they really speak, especially the first one, they speak to how people view slavery. Now, the biggest problem that we're running into with this, and I saw this really with the first video that I did, is the way that we think. We're 21st century people, postmodern people, who have a history behind them, especially one of the slavery of blacks in our own American history. We have places like Bosnia and places like this where we know that there's been slavery, and even the Jewish Holocaust, the forced labor camps of the Jews by the Nazis. We have all these different frames of reference of a type of slavery which is detestable. So our minds are molded and fixed on those particular forms of slavery. So whenever we're faced with another type of slavery, especially one from the Bible, which is, especially the ones that we're going to look at are thousands of years old, in a totally different context, people still judge this type of slavery upon what they know about modern slavery and modern forms. So I think, first of all, you have to realize that you have a 21st century mind. A lot of you that are watching this video are also ones who do not believe God even exists. And even if you do believe He exists and you don't love Him like I do, and like some Christians who are watching this video do, you don't trust Him and you judge Him based on your own standards, which are sinful and fallen, just like mine. And if you judge God based on a man's standard and what a man is, you're wrong, because even God says in the scriptures that my thoughts are not your thoughts, my ways are not your ways. God is perfect, He is holy, He is eternal, and He is completely set apart from us, and we are sinful by nature. And if we don't at least consider that fact, you're not going to get, or you're not going to even be able to come to a right view of slavery in the Bible and as instituted by God. So, the two types of slavery are, there's institutional slavery, which is the slavery that most people are familiar with. It's one that's really been made by man. It has nothing to do with God at all, His law, or nothing. It's a type of slavery which is really the perverted kind of slavery in relationship to God's form of biblical slavery. Man has taken that model and has perverted it, and has come up with this idea of institutional slavery. And most modern people are going to agree that slavery, in its general term, doesn't matter what kind of slavery they're looking at, they're going to say slavery in general, all kinds of slavery, are morally detestable. And they state that as being absolute. The problem with that is that it is not absolute. It's only true about the distorted forms of slavery instituted by man, which are rooted in oppression and in exploitation. Now, in terms of a definition, I'm going to go to page 39 here in Jim Jordan's book, Slavery in Biblical Perspective, which I introduced to you in the first part of the series. And on page 39, under definition of slavery, paragraph 1, he gives us a definition of the word slave from the 1966 edition of the New World Dictionary of the American Language. And that says, a human being who is owned by and absolutely subject to another human being, as by capture, purchase, or birth, bondservant divested of all freedom and personal rights. So Mr. Jordan says the other meanings given are metaphorical. The modifiers absolutely and all have been emphasized, and he underlined them in his text here, have been emphasized because these two terms highlight the inadequacy of the definition and also point to the difference between slavery as instituted by God and slavery as perverted by men. Now here's the key sentence. Non-Christian slavery, or institutional slavery as I put it, tries to be absolute and comprehensive, playing God, while biblical household slavery, which is the other type, is always in the sphere of co-equality. Okay? Now we've got to understand that. Now you're going to say, oh, what about all these texts? Well, we're going to hit some of those texts, maybe not even in this part, but in subsequent parts to the series. We're going to get into some of those texts in the Scriptures that you think that that's not the case. So we're going to get there. He goes on. He has a quote here from M.I. Finley from his, I think it's an article in International Encyclopedia of Social Sciences called Slavery. He talks about this idea of the institutional slavery and definitions and how difficult it is to define it. He says, all forms of labor on behalf of another, whether free or unfree, place the man who labors in the power of another. What separates the slave from the rest, including the serf or peon, is the totality of his powerlessness in principle, and for that the idea of property is juristically the key. Hence the term chattel slave. In other words, Mr. Jordan says, in the eyes of social law, the slave himself is regarded as property. The law may protect the slave in many ways and may grant him many rights, and the slave may be treated by society in ways indistinguishable from the treatment of free men, but in the eyes of the law, the slave is property. Now, in all forms of slavery, there is well, maybe not in all forms, but in most forms of slavery, there is an element where a person is property. Now, again, we come back to that point where people say, well, that is morally and ethically wrong. In some cases, yes, it is. But there are certain forms of slavery that you wouldn't even call a form of slavery where this indeed is not wrong and still is an element. And we're going to go back to the familial parallels here and use the family as an analogy, because the family is what biblical slavery is rooted in. So when you're talking about a family, you're talking about a husband and a wife. In essence, the wife is property of the man. That may be an offensive statement to you, and I'm going to further define that as we get into it down the road. But you have to understand that there are forms of slavery that you don't even realize are slavery. Children are, in essence, slaves of their parents for a time, and rightly so. We just don't like the word slave. It's a bad word these days. Well, we have to put those presuppositions aside for a moment to consider, well, there's a whole plethora of different ideas and different functions of what a slave is or was. And we have to consider those and understand what those are in proper historical context to understand them properly.